Long before Mr. Deacon ever appeared, Alder Lane had a reputation, not the dramatic, haunted house kind, more like a subtle wrongness woven into the air. My family moved there when I was 12, and I remember asking my mom why the brown house on the corner looked like it was sinking into the ground. She shrugged and said some places just get old. But even at that age, I could feel something else. The house had a porch light that stayed on 24 hours a day, buzzing faintly, like a tired insect trapped in glass. By the time I was 14, my best friend Kira lived 2 doors down from that house. We walked past it every morning on our way to school. Even in daylight, it was unnervingly silent. No birds on the gutters, no squirrels on the fence, just the porch light burning. The first time I saw Mr. Deacon, I was helping Kira rake leaves when a moving truck pulled up. A thin man stepped out, tall, stiff posture, hair parted too precisely. He wore a pale mustard sweater that looked like something a kindergarten teacher would retire immediately. He waved at us with a smile that felt rehearsed. "You girls live nearby?" he asked. Kira nodded cautiously. "Yeah, 2 houses down." "Wonderful," he said, lingering on us longer than normal. "It's important to know who comes and goes." We exchanged a look. Adults didn't usually talk like that. Over the next few weeks, small things happened. Notes on people's doors about noise violations, Deacon measuring property lines with a tape measure, staring from his window like he was memorizing routines. It was unsettling, but nobody said much. Adults always said things like, "Some neighbors are just like that," as if that explained everything. But then he left a typed note on Kira's door listing her mother's morning routine, every step, every movement, ending with, "Your daughter should stop sneaking out at 11:32 p.m. Except she never did. And that was when everything shifted. Kira's mom, who usually laughed off weirdness, didn't laugh at that note. She called the police. They knocked on Deacon's door, had a brief conversation we couldn't hear, and left looking annoyed rather than concerned. "He's just overly watchful," one officer told us. "Probably thinks he's helping." Helping who? Helping how? Nobody asked. That night I slept over at Kira's. We tried to pretend nothing was wrong, watched dumb sitcoms, and ate microwave pizza. Around 9 p.m., we heard knocking. 6 sharp hits in a row, fast and urgent. Kira's mom answered, and there he stood on the porch, illuminated by that ever-glowing light from 2 houses down. "I thought you should know," he said. "Your back door is unlocked." Kira's mom frowned. "We checked it. It's locked." "No," he said softly, tilting his head. "It isn't." We watched her walk to the kitchen, test the lock, freeze. The deadbolt was completely undone. We didn't sleep much that night. Over the next week, he became impossible to ignore. Every time we glanced toward his house, he was there, standing behind his window, facing us, not moving, just watching. One afternoon, Kira whispered, "Do you think he's sick or something?" "Maybe," I said, "or just lonely." But loneliness didn't explain why he walked across our yard at midnight, hands in his pockets like he was checking for vulnerabilities. It didn't explain why our motion sensor lights blinked on every time Kira opened her blinds. It didn't explain how he seemed to know schedules, habits, movements. Kira's dad installed new locks and extra cameras. Her mom started walking us to school. But the neighborhood whispered, convinced at worst he was eccentric and at best misunderstood. We were the only ones who felt something deeper, an unease that grew heavier every day, like the porch light across the street was watching just as closely as the man who lived beneath it. The scariest night of my life started completely normal. It was a Friday, sleepover night. We'd watched 2 horror movies, which in hindsight was a terrible choice. Everyone fell asleep except me. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the refrigerator hummed softer than usual. Around 2 a.m., I got up for water. When I walked back toward Kira's room, something made me glance at her window. A shadow moved outside. Not fast, not threatening, just present. I stepped closer. At first, the porch beyond the glass looked empty. Then my eyes adjusted. Someone was standing there, Tall, upright, inches from the window. Mr. Deacon. His face was pressed so close to the glass that his breath fogged a small circle, fading and reforming in a slow rhythm. His eyes weren't wild or angry, just oddly calm, like he was checking on something he believed he owned. My throat closed. "Kira," I whispered harshly. "Wake up." She jolted up. "What?" I pointed. She screamed. Her dad burst into the hallway so fast I barely saw him move before he charged through the back door and onto the porch. By the time he made it outside, Deacon was already halfway across his own lawn, muttering phrases we couldn't fully hear. Something about watching over the children. Something about keeping things aligned. The police arrived within 10 minutes. This time they didn't shrug it off. They issued a warning. "You step onto their property again, and you're getting arrested. Do you understand?" Deacon nodded, polite, expressionless. But as the officers turned away, I saw his eyes flick toward Kira's bedroom window. Not angry, not scared, just calculating. The next night we expected him to appear again. We closed blinds. We kept lights on. Kira's dad sat by the window with a baseball bat he pretended was just for show. None of us slept. Every sound, every creak, every gust of wind made us jump. But nothing happened. At sunrise, something strange happened. The porch light on Deacon's house flickered. Not lightly, not the usual buzzing. It sputtered like a dying star, then burned out completely. It had never gone out. Kira whispered, "What does that mean?" No one answered. Her dad finally said, "I'm going over there." Kira's mom snapped, "No, you're not." But he went anyway. We followed him outside, standing on the sidewalk, while he knocked on the door of the Brown house. No answer. He tried again. Harder. Still nothing. He tested the knob. It turned. The door creaked open. Inside, the house smelled like dust and mild mold. Empty. Not someone moved out yesterday, empty. Bare. No furniture, no rugs, no boxes, no footprints on the dusty floor. It felt like no one had lived there in years. Except he had. We had seen him, spoken to him, called the police on him. Kira's dad called out, "Hello? Mr. Deacon?" His voice echoed strangely, like the house didn't know how to hold sound anymore. We checked every room. They were all empty. Perfectly empty. The basement door was slightly ajar. I didn't want to look, but curiosity, stupid, terrified curiosity, pulled me down the stairs behind everyone else. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, with a single light bulb swaying. In the center of the room was just one thing, a folded piece of paper. Kira's dad picked it up and read silently. His face lost all its color. He handed it to us. On the page was a single typed sentence. "I'm still watching." The police treated it like a disappearance. They questioned us again and again, took the note, dusted for prints, reviewed camera footage. The footage showed Deacon entering his house the night before, alone, and never coming out. But no cameras showed him leaving. No moving truck, no car, no bags, nothing. They ended up shrugging the whole thing off as a man choosing to leave suddenly. But none of us believed that. Life slowly crawled back toward normal. The porch light stayed dead. Kids rode their bikes past the house again. Adults stopped whispering about him. But for months, I felt the weight of that house every time I passed it. Like someone was still looking through the windows even when they were dark. 1 year later, Kira and I were having another sleepover. We were older then, 15 going on 16, but we still checked the locks. Still kept blinds closed at night. Around midnight, I got up for water. Old habit. When I walked past the window, I hesitated. The brown house sat in its usual darkness. Then, just for a second, the porch light flickered. I froze. "Kira," I whispered shakily. "Come here." She hurried up next to me, annoyed. "What?" I pointed. The The porch light stayed dark. "You probably imagined it," she said gently, putting a hand on my shoulder. "We're both traumatized. That's all." Maybe she was right. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just my brain replaying old nightmares. But sometimes, when we're outside late, walking home from the bus stop, talking about college applications or dumb crushes, we both glance toward that sagging porch. And every now and then, we swear we see that faint glow struggling behind the glass, like someone is still standing there, making sure we know he never truly left. Pay attention to your instincts, especially when something feels wrong. Ignoring subtle warning signs can be far more dangerous than overreacting. Trust your gut, protect your boundaries, and listen when your fear is trying to tell you something important. Before everything that happened at Lockridge Sanitarium, people at school already thought I was jumpy. I didn't go to parties. I double-checked my locker. I crossed the street when a car slowed down too long. It wasn't like I had some tragic backstory. I just noticed things. I always believed if something felt wrong, it probably was. But being cautious at 17 doesn't make you interesting. It makes you the paranoid kid who needs to loosen up. I think that's why I said yes when Nolan invited me for a sleepover. Nolan was the opposite of me. Loud, reckless, the kind of guy who tried to skateboard off roofs because he saw it once online. He lived on the outskirts of Thistlewood, past long stretches of farmland and crooked fences. His backyard ended where the woods began, and deep inside those woods sat the crumbling remains of Lockridge Sanitarium. Everyone in town knew Lockridge. Some said it closed because of fires. Others whispered about disappearances. A few said the place was cursed. My mom always said, "Old buildings collect stories when people don't." I believed her, mostly. That night, after hours of gaming, Nolan held up a ring of tarnished keys like he'd discovered buried treasure. "My uncle used to do security there," he said, jingling them. "He forgot these in a drawer. We could go look around, just a quick walkthrough." I stared at the keys, my stomach flipping. "Dude, Lockridge is condemned." "It's a building, not a monster," he insisted. "Come on, you can't be scared of everything." And that was the moment, 1 second of wanting to be normal, to not be the jumpy kid, that pushed me into saying, "Fine, just for a minute." I didn't know those words would rewrite the rest of my life. The sanitarium looked worse up close. The walls were weather-stained concrete, vines strangling every corner. Windows were busted out like missing teeth. Nolan grinned as he shoved one of the keys into a rusted lock. "You ready?" he asked. "No," I muttered, but the door creaked open before I could back out. Inside smelled like old metal and forgotten years. Dust hung in the air like smoke. Flashlights cut thin beams through the dark, landing on abandoned wheelchairs, scattered paperwork, a doll missing its head. The silence wasn't empty. It felt like it was listening. "Dude," I whispered, "this place is straight out of a horror movie." "Exactly," Nolan said proudly. We walked through hallways lined with peeling paint, the walls bowing inward like they were tired. A few doors still had patient numbers on them. One had claw marks, actual claw marks, around the handle. I told myself it was old damage, animals, weather, anything logical. Then Nolan stopped. "Hey, look at this." On the dusty floor were footprints, not old ones, fresh, muddy, leading deeper into the building. I felt the back of my neck prickle. "We should leave. Or we see who's in here," he argued. Not helping. But he was already following the prints, and like an idiot, I followed him. Downstairs, in the lower ward, we found a room lit by a single battery lantern sitting on a metal tray. Around it were jars filled with cloudy liquid. Floating inside were shapes I didn't want to identify. Maybe animal parts, maybe not. A heavy metal door stood in the corner, covered in long scratches. Nolan whispered, "Dude, someone's staying here." Before I could answer, footsteps echoed behind us. Slow, steady, getting closer. I knew then that we weren't alone. The footsteps stopped just beyond the doorway. I felt Nolan tense beside me. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Then something scraped across the floor. Fabric, maybe a foot dragging. Our flashlight beams trembled. "Hello?" Nolan called, his voice cracking. I wanted to strangle him. 5 figures stepped into the lantern light. They wore tattered gray hospital gowns, stained and warped from age. Their feet were bare, pale against the floor, and on their heads were masks. Burlap sacks sewn into crude human faces, stitches jagged like a child had made them in the dark. None of them spoke. None of them moved. They only tilted their heads, all at the exact same angle, like puppets on invisible strings. A cold wave rolled through me. My legs nearly gave out. Nolan grabbed my arm, voice barely a whisper. "Okay. Nope. We're leaving." As he stepped backward, one of the masked figures twitched, then another, and then all 5 stepped forward at the same time. "Nolan," I whispered. "Run." We bolted out of the room, the sound of bare feet slapping tile erupting behind us. My lungs burned as we sprinted through narrow corridors that seemed to stretch further than before. Every time I looked back, their silhouettes filled the hallway, moving faster, heads still tilted, masks bobbing slightly with each step. We slammed through a half-broken door, stumbled up the stairs, and tore down the main hallway. Something clattered behind us, metal hitting the floor, but we didn't dare look. The moment the front door burst open and cold night air hit our faces, I didn't feel relief, just dread. Because the footsteps didn't stop right away. Even outside, we could hear them, those same synchronized steps, until suddenly they stopped all at once, swallowed by the dark woods behind us. We sprinted through the trees like our lives depended on it, because honestly, it felt like they did. Branches whipped my arms and snagged my clothes. Nolan kept saying, "They're behind us. Don't look. Don't look." Eventually, we burst out of the woods into Nolan's backyard. We collapsed on the grass, gasping so hard I thought my chest might split. For a few seconds, neither of us could form words. Finally, I managed. "What the hell was that?" Nolan shook his head, staring at the ground. "I don't know, man. People messing with us? Squatters? Some sick prank?" "Those masks weren't a prank," I said. "And the room, the jars." He cut me off, panic edging his voice. "Dude, I know." We both froze when we heard something from the trees. A rustle, soft, slow. "Stay down," Nolan whispered. At the edge of the yard, just beyond the line where the porch light faded, stood a shape. Tall, completely still. Too still. My skin crawled. "Is that?" he whispered. The figure didn't move, didn't step forward, didn't raise a hand, just stood there, half swallowed by shadow, almost as if it wanted us to know it wasn't done with us, but wasn't crossing that invisible line. "Get inside," I said, pulling Nolan up. We bolted into his house, locked every door, closed every blind. His mom found us shaking and pale, and even though we didn't tell her the whole truth, she wouldn't have believed it. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. When dawn finally came, the trees looked normal again, peaceful even. But I knew what I saw. We both did. Something, or someone, had followed us out of Lockridge, and it knew exactly where we lived. I never slept over anywhere again. Nolan didn't either. He stopped joking about ghost stories at school, stopped bragging about reckless stunts. We didn't talk much about Lockridge, not because we wanted to forget, but because remembering hurt too much. A week later, we went back to Nolan's backyard during the day, standing near the tree line. Everything was quiet. Birds chirped, sunlight filtered through branches. It almost felt normal. "Do you think it was real?" he asked softly. "Like, really real?" I swallowed. "You saw them too." "Yeah, but people don't do that. Not normal people." "Maybe they weren't normal," I said. "Maybe they were squatters. Maybe some old patient group living off-grid. Or," I hesitated, "or someone using the sanitarium for things we shouldn't know about." Nolan rubbed his arms as if suddenly cold. "We should tell someone." "And say what? That we broke into a condemned building and got chased by grown adults wearing stitched masks?" I shook my head. "No one will believe us." He didn't argue. Before we headed inside, I glanced back at the trees one last time. For just a moment, a tiny sliver of a second, I saw something pale behind the brush. The shape of a head, a burlap mask. When I blinked, it was gone. Years later, as an adult, I still avoid the outskirts of Thistlewood. I still cross the street when a car idles too long. And I still trust my instincts more than I trust anyone else's reassurance. Because fear, I learned, is not always paranoia. Sometimes it's the only thing standing between you and the unknown, waiting in the shadows of an abandoned place. Quiet, patient, watching for someone dumb enough to step inside again. Before I turned 13, I thought every cousin's house felt like a maze. Creaky steps, dim hallways, weird shadows that didn't match the lamps. But Mira's house was different. It wasn't just big. It felt hollow, like there were extra spaces you couldn't see unless you knew where to look. I slept over there most weekends because my aunt and uncle were cool, and Mira and I liked staying up late watching dumb movies. Still, I never shook the feeling that something else lived there too. Something quiet and patient. The stairway landing was the worst spot. It stuck out above the living room like a wooden balcony, and when you walked past it, it always felt colder. The first time we heard tapping from underneath it, Mira joked, "Probably the ghost of chores undone." I laughed, but it wasn't funny. The tapping was soft, rhythmic, almost polite. Then it stopped so fast it felt like someone had put a hand over their own mouth. We asked her dad and he waved it off. "Old houses make music," he said, like that explained everything. I almost believed him until little things around the house started going missing. A snack here, a hairbrush there. Her backpack moved from her chair to the hallway overnight. "Quit messing with my stuff," Mira told her younger brother. "I didn't touch anything," he protested. And for once, I believed him. Because whatever was moving things didn't feel like a joke or a prank. It felt like someone learning the house, slowly and carefully. The weeks after the tapping started were strange. Every time I visited, something felt slightly out of place, like the house had been breathing differently while we were gone. Once, Mira's bedroom door closed by itself while we were downstairs eating cereal. No breeze, no one near it, just a slow swing and a click. She stared at it and said, "Okay, that wasn't cute." Another time, her snacks disappeared. Not one or two, whole packs of crackers and granola bars. Her mom thought Mira was sneaking food into her room, but the wrappers were nowhere. Not in the trash, not under the bed. Gone. Then the hairbrush incident happened. Mira's hair is curly and brown. The strands on the brush that reappeared in the hallway were long, dead straight, and almost black. Her mom swore none of them matched her own hair. Her dad said it was probably from a friend, but that didn't make sense either. No one had been over except me. "You're not messing with me, right?" Mira asked one night. "Why would I?" I shot back. "Because you scare easy." She wasn't wrong. But this wasn't the kind of story you made up to freak out your cousin. One night, while brushing our teeth, we heard it again. 3 small taps beneath the landing. Just 3. Like a signal. Mira whispered, "Do you hear that?" I nodded, toothbrush still in my mouth. Her eyes softened in a way that told me she no longer thought it was house noise. Something was in the house. Something that listened, and something that waited. It was during a stormy sleepover when everything snapped into place. Rain hammered the windows, and thunder rattled the picture frames. Mira and I sat on her rug watching videos on her laptop, the glow the only light in the room. That's when we heard it. A heavy thump beneath us. Not a tap, a shift, like someone adjusting themselves right under the floorboards. I froze mid-sentence. Mira muted the video. The next few seconds stretched thin, the silence so sharp it hurt. "We have to look," she whispered. "We could just not," I suggested. She rolled her eyes, but her hands were shaking. We pulled the rug aside, revealing old floorboards. As we felt around, Mira's fingers hit a seam, a perfect square cut into the wood. So clean it couldn't be accidental. "Your dad did this?" I asked. "No," she said. "He hates DIY anything." Together we wedged a butter knife under the edge and lifted. The panel rose an inch. Just enough. A cold draft brushed our hands. "Shine your phone," Mira whispered. I leaned over and lowered the light. Instead of dust or pipes, a small crawl space stared back. Cramped. Dark. Lived in. Blankets. A chipped mug. Half-eaten granola bars. A little spiral notebook, edges worn. My stomach twisted. Mira reached in with trembling fingers and pulled the notebook free. "What if they're still down there?" I whispered. "Then we go upstairs," she said too quickly. But when she opened the notebook and we read the first line, we didn't move. "Sometimes the girl leaves lights on. That means I can move." Mira flipped through the notebook with growing terror. Page after page was filled with cramped handwriting, observations, routines, notes about her family's schedules. Gets home at 3:41. Parents argue in kitchen Fridays. Girl brushes hair for too long. She leaves the window open when it rains. Every entry felt like a violation, a record of someone who shouldn't have been anywhere near us. My hands went numb. "Mira, this is bad." Her voice cracked. "No kidding." Then we hit the last page. The ink was darker, fresher. "She has a friend over tonight. They're awake, waiting." We stared at each other, breaths shallow. A sound drifted up from the crawl space. Not a tap, not a shift. A soft inhale. Someone was breathing directly beneath us. I swear my heart stopped. Mira slapped the panel shut so fast it shook the floor. We pressed our weight onto it until her dad rushed upstairs asking what happened. "There's someone under the house," Mira cried. At first he thought we were playing around, but we shoved the notebook into his hands and the color drained from his face. He didn't ask another question. He grabbed his phone, told us to stay in the living room, and dialed 911. The police arrived fast, 4 officers, flashlights drawn. They searched the crawl space, the basement, the entire property. There were scratch marks along a broken basement window and footprints in the dust beneath the landing. Someone had been living inches away, listening, watching, and they were gone. After the police left, the house felt hollow in a different way, like all the safety had been sucked out from under the floorboards along with the intruder. They never found the person who lived there. No fingerprints, no video, no name, just the crawl space, and that notebook full of our lives. Mira's parents replaced the boards, installed cameras, added locks. They even had contractors come out to check the whole house for hidden access points. But fear seeped into everything anyway. I slept with the hallway light on for months after. Mira did too. She told me later she couldn't sit on the landing without imagining a hand pushing up from beneath the boards. One afternoon, weeks later, I visited her again. Things felt normal enough. We played games, ate microwave pizza. When it got late, I stayed in the guest room downstairs. And at around midnight, just as I started drifting off, I heard it. One tap, very soft, from the stairway landing above me. I froze. My breath went shallow, my fingers gripping the blanket. After a few seconds, the sound didn't repeat. Maybe it was the house, maybe it was nothing. But the memory of that notebook, those quiet observations, those stolen moments, made it hard to believe in coincidences anymore. The next morning, Mira met me at the kitchen table and whispered, "Did you hear anything last night?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She nodded, eyes wide, because some houses don't forget the people who hide inside them, and some people don't leave, at least not completely. Pay attention to the small things. Ignored signs can become real dangers, and trusting your instincts may be the only thing standing between you and someone watching from the dark. When I think back to my childhood, most memories feel small. Little flashes of school hallways, summer sprinklers, and long bike rides that never seem to end. But some memories don't fade with time. Some cling to you like shadows stretched by a street lamp, refusing to disappear. Mine begins with Benson Park, a place every kid in town knew, but no adult ever really talked about. Benson Park was huge, too big really. It had trails that bent into the woods, old shelters that looked like they'd collapse if someone breathed too hard near them, and a lookout tower that had been half rotted since before I was born. Kids whispered about how people went missing there, or how strange shapes appeared after sunset. But of course nobody ever proved any of it. It was just the kind of place where fear grew easily. My friend Mara lived 2 blocks away from the park. She and I were both 12 the year everything happened, and she was the kind of girl who loved dares more than safety rules. When she invited me to stay over one Friday, I said yes without thinking. Her parents were working a late shift and gave us the usual list of instructions. Lock the doors. Keep the lights on. Do not go outside. We nodded and promised we wouldn't do anything stupid, but even then I knew Mara was already planning something. She always wore this mischievous grin when she had an idea she knew was bad. And sure enough, the moment her parents' car pulled out of the driveway, she turned to me with that grin. "You want to do something fun?" she asked. I should have said no, but I didn't. That night would become the moment my childhood ended, quietly, suddenly, and without any warning at all. It was nearly 11 when Mara suggested the dare. We were sitting on her bedroom floor surrounded by snacks, nail polish, and the beginnings of a sleepover movie lineup. She leaned back on her elbows and said it casually, as if she hadn't been waiting all night to ask. "Let's go to Benson Park, just for a little challenge." I stared at her, horrified. "Your parents said we're not supposed to leave the house." "They always say that." She shrugged. "Besides, we'll only be gone like 15 minutes. No one will know." I hesitated. Mara wasn't bad, just fearless in the kind of way that gets people into trouble. I didn't want to disappoint her, and I definitely didn't want to be the one who chickened out, so eventually I agreed. We snuck out through her back door, which squeaked so loudly I was sure the whole neighborhood heard it. The air was cool, the sky cloudy, and the streets empty. Benson Park looked even bigger in the dark. The only lights were a couple of weak street lamps flickering near the entrance. Mara led the way along the cracked sidewalk, whispering like someone might overhear us even though no one was around. "Okay," she said when we reached the half-collapsed lookout tower. 3 minutes under there. Lights off." The tower creaked above us as we sat in the dirt. We turned off our flashlights, letting darkness swallow everything. For the first minute, we whispered jokes, trying to scare each other. But halfway through, Mara suddenly grabbed my arm, squeezing so hard I nearly yelped. "Shh," she whispered. Her eyes were wide, terrified. That's when I heard it too. The crunch of leaves behind us. Slow, deliberate, like someone circling. Then the breathing, deep, uneven, much too close. I froze. We both did. We crawled away from the tower first, moving slowly, terrified the slightest sound would bring whoever, or whatever, was behind us closer. Once we reached the open grass, instinct took over. We ran. Hard. My shoes slapped the ground. My chest burned. and my heart hammered so loudly it drowned out everything else. When we reached the sidewalk near Mara's street, she kept looking over her shoulder. "Don't look," she whispered. "But fear makes you curious in awful ways." So I looked. At the entrance to Benson Park stood a tall figure, backlit by a flickering streetlight. He wasn't running. He wasn't walking. He was just standing there, hands at his sides, head tilted as if he were studying us. I wanted to scream, but my voice felt trapped somewhere deep in my throat. We sprinted the last block and stumbled onto Mara's porch. My shaking hands fumbled with the doorknob. The moment we shoved the door open, something happened that still freezes me when I think about it. Footsteps, fast, pounding toward us from down the street, but they weren't the normal rhythm of running. They were heavier, like the person chasing us wasn't sprinting at full speed, but still somehow covering ground too quickly. We slammed the door, locked every bolt, and backed away. Something hit the porch railing so hard the windows rattled. Mara clutched my arm. He followed us. He followed us all the way here. We stood there listening, barely breathing. But after that one violent impact, nothing. No more footsteps. No more movement. Just silence stretching across the house like a warning. When the police arrived, they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone running, nothing at all. But Mara and I knew better. Someone was out there that night, and he wanted us to know it. The police chalked it up to imagination, nerves, or maybe a stray dog. Mara rolled her eyes so hard I thought she might sprain something, but I didn't argue. I was too shaken to talk confidently. "You girls were probably just scared from being out so late," the officer said. "Next time, stay inside like your parents told you." Next time. I couldn't imagine stepping foot near that park ever again. After the officers left, Mara and I retreated to her room. We locked the door even though it felt pointless. Whatever that man was capable of, wooden bedroom doors weren't going to stop him. Mara paced for a while. "You saw him, right? You saw him standing there?" "Yes," I said quietly. The image replayed in my head like a loop. The street lamp flickering, that tilted head, motionless, watching. She sat beside me. "Do you think he lives near the park?" "I don't know. What if he followed us earlier? What if he was already there when we showed up?" I didn't want to think about it, but deep down, I suspected she was right. The rest of the night we stayed awake, listening for footsteps, rattling, anything. Every creak in the house made us jump. At one point, the floorboard in the hallway popped, and both of us grabbed each other's hands until our fingers ached. We didn't sleep at all. When her parents came home in the morning, we didn't tell them the full story. We just said we'd heard something at the park and gotten scared. Mara's mom scolded us for sneaking out, and honestly, we deserved it. But even now, I know leaving out the truth wasn't really about avoiding trouble. It was fear. Fear that saying everything out loud would make it real again. Fear that the man might hear us. Fear that he hadn't actually gone away. Weeks passed, and life returned to something like normal. But I never stopped thinking about that night. Every time I walked home at dusk, I kept my eyes down the long stretch of empty road. Every time a streetlight flickered, I felt my stomach twist. Mara tried to talk about it once. "Maybe he was just some weirdo messing with us," she said. But even she didn't sound convinced. Eventually, she moved to another town, and we drifted apart in the way childhood friends sometimes do. But every October, like clockwork, I'd catch myself glancing toward Benson Park, even though I hadn't gone near it in years. Once, when I was 16, I drove past the old entrance on my way home. The tower was gone by then, finally torn down because it was too unsafe. But the memory stayed clear. Too clear. That night, after passing the park, I couldn't sleep. I kept feeling like I'd seen something at the edge of the trees. A silhouette too still, too tall, too familiar. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. Now I'm older, yet the fear hasn't fully left me. I still avoid looking down long, empty streets at night. I still check over my shoulder when walking alone. And sometimes, when the world is quiet and the air feels heavy, I get that same chill I felt at 12. The feeling of being watched. The feeling that something is out there, waiting. Patient, unmoving. Tilted head, hands at its sides, and every single time, I walk a little faster, just in case. Sometimes the scariest dangers aren't monsters or legends. They're real people who take advantage of fear, darkness, and isolation. Listen to warnings, trust your instincts, and never trade safety for a moment of excitement. Courage isn't proved by taking risks. It's proved by knowing when to walk away. Before the night at Tessa's cabin, I thought fear was something you felt only during horror movies or when you walked home after dark. I grew up in a suburb where the scariest sound at night was a raccoon fighting with the neighbor's trash can. So, when Tessa invited me to her family's cabin in Rowan Creek, I imagined cozy nights, hot chocolate, and the sort of summer adventure you brag about once school starts. Rowan Creek wasn't a town so much as a cluster of houses tucked between thick forests and a lake that always looked colder than it really was. Everything there felt quieter, still, almost politely eerie. Tessa's cabin sat on a slope overlooking the water, with huge windows that seemed like a great idea during the day, sunlight pouring in, beautiful views, but at night, they turned into dark mirrors you couldn't help but look toward, even when you didn't want to. Her parents were warm and easygoing. They gave us snacks, told us not to open the door for anyone, and promised to be back by 2. Scout, their big fluffy mutt, took his usual place by the back door, as if he'd been guarding the cabin his entire life. Tessa fell asleep early, mid-movie, a blanket half covering her face. I lay awake longer than I meant to, listening to the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the wooden walls. It was peaceful enough that I started drifting off, and then came the tapping 3 soft knocks, a pause, then 3 more. At the time, I thought it was nothing. Now I know better. When I heard the tapping again, I lifted my head, expecting to see a branch brushing the siding. The tapping wasn't loud, but it was precise, too steady to be random. Scout lifted his head, ears perked, but he didn't growl. He just stared toward the window. Then I saw him. A figure stood inches from the glass, dark against the faint glow from the yard light. He wasn't hunched or shifting like someone caught off guard. He stood perfectly still, like he had been there for a long time. His hand was pressed against the window, fingers splayed, pale skin, short hair, no features I could make out, clearly just the impression of a face, and the sense that he was staring directly at me. I couldn't breathe. My whole body tightened, as if moving even an inch would draw him closer. When I blinked, he moved not enough to look dramatic, but enough to make my stomach drop. His head tilted slightly, like he was curious about me, like he realized I was awake. Then he leaned forward and the faintest shape of a smile appeared. A wide one. Wrong. Too calm. Too entertained. I finally managed to slide off the couch, not stand slide, inch by inch. My hands shook so hard they barely held me up. I reached Tessa and nudged her shoulder, whispering her name until she stirred. "What?" she mumbled. I pointed at the window, but when she looked, he was already gone. The yard was empty, just the wind through the trees. Tessa frowned. "You just had a nightmare." I knew I hadn't, but arguing wouldn't help. Scout stood up then, fur raised, staring at the glass, and that's when I knew. Whatever I saw had been real enough for him. Tessa tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. Every time the house settled or the wind brushed the siding, I jolted. Scout paced, restless, occasionally looking at the long windows as if expecting someone to return. At around 1:30, headlights washed over the living room, her parents pulling into the driveway. Relief hit me so fast I almost cried. When they came inside, shaking off the cold air, her dad smiled. "You girls stay up too late?" I didn't know how to answer. Tessa hesitated, then said, something scared her. She pointed at me. She thought someone was outside. Her parents exchanged that look adults use when they're trying not to worry. "Maybe a deer," her mom offered gently. "No," I said. "It was a man. He was right at the window." That wiped the smile off her dad's face. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped back outside. We followed, huddled in the doorway. The air smelled like wet pine and lake mist. Within seconds, he stopped walking. "Girls," he said quietly. "Come look at this. Footprints, clear ones, human, barely distorted by the grass." They circled the cabin, full circles passing under windows, around corners, doubling back, like the person had been making rounds, watching, choosing angles. And they ended right beneath the window where I'd seen him. Tessa's mom put an arm around her, pulling her close. Her dad scanned the tree line, jaw tight, but the woods swallowed everything beyond a few yards. "No more staying alone at night," he muttered. I didn't argue. None of us did. We returned home the next morning, but the cabin stayed with me. Tessa stopped talking about sleepovers entirely. She pretended it didn't bother her, but I saw how her hands clenched when someone mentioned Rowan Creek. Scout barked more often, too, especially at windows, as if he remembered something we never should have seen. My parents tried to reason with me. "Honey, it was probably just someone passing through," my dad said. "A hiker who got too close." But hikers don't stand perfectly still at midnight staring into someone's home. They don't circle a cabin multiple times. They don't smile like they're waiting for you to get closer. I couldn't explain any of that without sounding dramatic, so I just nodded. At night, I avoided windows. I closed blinds, then checked to make sure they were really closed. My room had always felt safe, but now every reflection looked suspicious. Every shadow felt like it hid a face. A month later, Tessa told me quietly at school. My parents installed motion lights and cameras, but something triggered them last week, twice. "What was on the footage?" I asked. She shook her head. "Nothing. Just the camera shaking a little, like someone bumped the pole it's attached to." We didn't talk about it again after that. Neither of us wanted to imagine the alternative, that the man hadn't been a one-time nightmare. That maybe he came back. Maybe he still did. I didn't sleep well for months, and whenever I did, I dreamed of tapping. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more, and a smile pressed against glass. I'm older now, but certain details never fade. I still see that sliver of a smile when I wake from a nightmare. I still hear Scout's low growl in my head, warning us before we realize the danger outside. And whenever I stay anywhere with large windows at night, I can't help checking twice, first for reassurance, then for confirmation that nothing's staring back. Tessa and I drifted apart as we grew up. Not intentionally, life just folded us into different corners. Last I heard, her family sold the cabin. No one wanted the responsibility of maintaining a place that held too many unanswered questions. Once, early in college, I passed an article online about Rowan Creek, a brief mention, a suspicious trespassing report near the lake. Someone seen lingering by a property in the middle of the night. No arrests, no identification, just shadows in the trees. Even now, whenever I think about that night, one thing sticks with me more than fear. The man didn't run when I saw him. He didn't flinch, didn't pull back, didn't panic. He smiled, like watching me wake up was the part he'd been waiting for. Maybe he left Rowan Creek. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he wanders places just like it, quiet, isolated, with big windows and kids asleep inside. Whenever I wake up near a window and feel a shiver crawl up my spine, I remind myself, it's probably nothing. But then I remember the footprints in the dew, and how easily a stranger can stand inches away, without making a sound. I used to believe solitude could fix anything. That belief was the only thing that kept me moving through the grind of long work weeks, constant noise, and the feeling that everyone always wanted something from me. So when an old friend offered me the use of his remote cabin in the Montana backcountry, a place with no neighbors for miles, no cell service, and no obligations, I accepted without a second thought. I packed light, a few books, food, and a promise to myself that I wouldn't think about the city for 7 full days. The drive out was the kind that slows your pulse. Mountains rising in the distance, pines thickening along the road, snow starting to pepper the ground. By the time I reached the dirt road leading to the cabin, the world felt quieter than anything I'd known in years. The cabin itself sat on a gentle slope above a frozen creek, with a porch swing that creaked if you breathed on it. Inside, it was all wood pine floors, knotty log walls, a cast iron stove that glowed warm enough to thaw every worry out of me. While I unloaded, 2 trucks rolled up the road and parked beside the cabin. Out stepped 3 locals who introduced themselves like they'd been expecting me. "Name's Boyd," said the oldest, thick beard and eyes like winter sky. "We always check on new folks. Make sure they know the area. His wife, Linda, handed me a jar of something that looked suspiciously like homemade moonshine. Their nephew, Evan, waved quietly from the truck bed. They stayed for maybe half an hour, friendly, curious, telling me where to hike and what trails to avoid. When their tail lights faded, I felt grateful, Montana kind of grateful, the kind you don't question. It wasn't until nightfall that things changed. The first night was supposed to be peaceful. I made chili, stoked the fire, and read a book by lantern light. Around midnight, the wind cut through the trees like something sharpening its teeth. Then the heater sputtered. Once, twice, then everything went dark. The generator had stopped. I grabbed a flashlight, slipped on my boots, and stepped outside. The air was freezing, thick enough to bite. The porch lights were dead. The trees a single sheet of black. I swear the woods felt aware. Before I had time to process, I heard an engine rumble. Boyd's truck pulled up the road, headlights spilling across my porch. "Thought your power'd be on," he called. Saw the lights go out. I wasn't proud of the relief that washed over me. Together we walked to the generator shed. The snow around it looked undisturbed until Linda pointed at something near the dirt road. "Those tracks weren't there earlier," she said. "Boot prints. Deep, deliberate, leading towards the cabin. Not away." Evan followed them with the beam of his flashlight, swallowing hard. "Someone walked right up here," he said. "But where'd they go?" The prints stopped 10 feet from the porch and vanished, as though the person had simply lifted off the ground. A twig snapped in the tree line. We spun toward the sound. Between the pines, something moved, just a silhouette, tall and still, as if it had been watching us longer than we had been watching it. "Get inside," Boyd said quietly. "Now." We backed toward the cabin. The figure didn't follow, didn't run. It only faded into the dark like it knew the woods better than we ever could. The generator wouldn't restart. We were officially not alone. We decided to stay awake in shifts. Boyd and I kept watch outside, huddled by a fire we built from split logs stacked behind the cabin. The warmth didn't do much. The cold had a way of sliding under your skin like a warning. Linda stayed inside, gathering blankets and making coffee on a propane burner. Evan mostly paced, too young to hide his fear, too old to admit it. Around 2 a.m., the cabin made a soft thud from inside, then another. "Maybe the wind," I said. Boyd shook his head. "Wind don't move things times inside asterisk." We went in. The room was dark except for lantern light. The coffee mug Linda had placed on the counter was now on the floor, rolling in a slow arc. A book I'd left beside the couch lay open on a page I hadn't reached. "Did anyone touch these?" I asked. Everyone shook their heads. Then came the quietest tapping knuckles against wood. Slow, patient, testing. It came from the back window. Evan whispered, "Is he messing with us?" The tapping stopped. Linda pulled aside the curtain only an inch. Her breath hitched. "Someone's right there," she mouthed. Boyd moved to the door immediately. We locked down. Nobody goes outside alone. We reinforced the windows with furniture and dragged the kitchen table in front of the back door. The fire outside crackled, illuminating the edges of the night through the windows, but anything beyond 10 feet looked like a wall of ink. An hour passed. Then another. We heard footsteps circling the cabin, slow, crunching, deliberate. Once, the intruder exhaled near the porch steps. A warm mist fogged the bottom of the window. "Why isn't he breaking in?" I whispered. Boyd answered without looking up. "Because he doesn't want in. He wants us awake." That was somehow worse. The night stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Every sound felt sharper. At around 4 in the morning, the fire outside dimmed. Evan went to toss on another log, then froze. "There's something carved in the snow." We all crowded the window. In the firelight's glow, we saw it. A crooked spiral drawn into the snow beside the porch. Not a symbol I knew. Not something natural. It looked like the intruder had knelt there for a long time, dragging a finger slowly, thoughtfully. "Why would he draw that?" Linda whispered. "Because he had time," Boyd said. "Meaning he's been sitting out there watching us." The idea made my stomach twist. A few minutes later, one of the side windows cracked, just a hairline fracture, like a fingertip pressed against the glass. I shined a light and caught a glimpse of a shadow pulling away. Not a face, not a full shape, just a reminder that he was still there. I radioed the local ranger station with the small emergency unit my friend had left in the cabin. Static at first, then a voice barely breaking through. "Copy. Stay inside. Officers en route." ETA sunrise. Sunrise felt like a week away. We returned to the living room and sat shoulder to shoulder, lantern flickering, the fire outside glowing faintly through the cracks in the boards we'd set. None of us spoke. Then, just before dawn, the sound stopped. No footsteps. No tapping. No breathing outside the window. The woods felt too silent. Evan removed the table barricading the back door and eased it open. Cold air rushed in. No figure. No footprints. Just a single shape carved into the frost along the porch railing, a handprint. Not large, but pressed with unsettling force. He waited, Boyd muttered, and then he walked away. But he hadn't walked. There were no new tracks. The sun crept over the ridge, pale and slow, but it still felt like a rescue. The police arrived about an hour after sunrise. 2 deputies and a forest ranger who'd clearly seen stranger things than he let on. They walked the perimeter, studied the handprint, measured the footprints that stopped too abruptly to make sense. One deputy asked, "You're sure you only saw one person?" "Positive," Boyd answered. "But he moved around the cabin all night? Never made a sound he didn't want us to hear," I said. That earned a look from the ranger, something halfway between concern and recognition. When the officers left, the neighbors stayed a little longer. They helped clean up the scattered objects inside the cabin, fixed the cracked window with plywood, even got the generator running again. "You heading home today?" Boyd asked. I wanted to say no. I wanted to pretend I could shrug off the night like weather. But something inside me had shifted. "Yeah," I said. "I think I've had enough quiet for a while." Boyd nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. When their trucks rolled away, I stood on the porch a long time. The morning sun touched the trees, and the woods looked innocent again, just wind and branches and soft snow. But every sound now had a question behind it. Every shadow seemed to hold its breath. I had come here for solitude. What I learned was that solitude is never guaranteed. Something can always be watching, listening, waiting for a moment when you think you're alone. When I finally locked the cabin behind me and started the long drive back to civilization, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Part of me didn't want to know if someone was standing at the tree line. Isolation may feel peaceful, but it also requires awareness and respect, because danger often hides where we least expect it, and the world is never as empty as it looks. I grew up believing my childhood home was the safest place on earth. My parents bought it when I was 6, a square, 2-story place with creaky floors, drafty windows, and a basement that always smelled like wet stone. Back then, the basement terrified me. I'd sprint up the stairs every time, convinced something would grab my ankle. But as I got older, the fear faded into something I laughed about with friends. Years later, after moving out for college and work, the house still felt like a nostalgic safe haven. So when my friends suggested a long overdue sleepover like the ones we used to have in high school, I didn't hesitate. We piled into the living room on a windy Friday night, blankets everywhere, popcorn bowls scattered, and a stack of horror movies lined up on the TV. The storm outside was already rolling in. Wind rattled the windows just enough to make us crack jokes about ghosts and intruders. When the lights flickered, we all groaned and blamed the old wiring. But honestly, the timing was too perfect. Third movie of the night, right at the creepiest part. Then the power cut completely. "Of course," I said, laughing nervously as my stomach tightened. My friends pulled out flashlights while I lit a candle and tried to act braver than I felt. "I'll check the circuit box," I said. "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, avenge my death." They laughed. I laughed. But as I headed toward the basement door, something in me whispered that I shouldn't. I went anyway. The basement air hit me instantly, cold, heavy, like a breath held too long. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, grazing old furniture, dusty boxes, and the spider webs stretched like fine wires across the ceiling. I had been down here hundreds of times growing up, but tonight everything felt slightly wrong. Maybe it was the silence, maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was the muddy footprints on the concrete floor. I stopped so fast I felt my knees lock. The prints were large, bigger than my dad's boots, and fresh. Rainwater still rimmed them. They led from the bottom of the stairs across the floor toward the window well in the far corner. "That's new," I whispered to myself. A part of my brain scrambled for explanations. Maybe a raccoon somehow forced its way in. Maybe water dripped weirdly. Maybe I was tired and imagining the shape, but the footprints were unmistakably human. I followed them only with my eyes, never taking a step closer until my flashlight drifted toward a stack of boxes. That's when I saw it, a shadow shifting, subtle, like someone leaning out of view. I froze, breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I managed, though I regretted it instantly. Something whispered back, not a word. More like a breath shaped into sound. Low, deliberate, human. That broke me. I spun around, sprinted up the stairs, and slammed the basement door so hard the frame rattled. My hands shook as I turned the lock. My friends stared at me. "What?" they asked. "What happened?" I tried to answer, but before I could, we heard it. A slow, soft tapping from directly beneath our feet. At first my friends thought I was pulling a prank. But when the tapping shifted, moving from one ceiling beam to another, their faces drained of color. All three of us stood frozen around the couch, listening. "That's not the house settling," my friend Megan whispered. "Nope," I said. "Definitely not." Another sound followed, a box sliding across concrete, scraping just loud enough to echo. I felt sick. Whatever was down there wasn't trying to hide. It wanted us to know it was moving. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911 with shaking fingers. My voice cracked as I tried to explain what we heard, what I saw, what might be inside my house. "Officers are on the way," the operator said calmly. "Stay together. Do not approach the basement." "We're not," I said quickly. We turned off our flashlights so that whoever was down there couldn't track our position, but kept one candle burning in the middle of the room like it might protect us somehow. Every few seconds, one of us flinched at the wind or the creaking floor. "Why would someone even come in?" Megan whispered. "The storm's awful, but still, I didn't have an answer." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The tapping stopped suddenly, too suddenly. The silence made everything worse, like the intruder was listening for us now, choosing his next move. Then came footsteps, slow, careful, right under where we stood. One step, pause, another step. The sound moved toward the stairs. We backed away in sync, breath caught, hearts hammering. The basement door handle twitched. Something pushed from the other side. We held onto each other like we were bracing against a wave. The door handle twitched again but didn't turn. Instead, whatever was behind it simply pressed, testing the strength, pushing just enough to make the wood flex. Then, mercifully, red and blue lights flashed through the rain-streaked front windows. "That's the cops," someone yelled. I've never been so relieved to hear pounding on the front door. 2 officers rushed in after we let them inside, flashlights drawn, hands near their holsters. They listened carefully as we explained everything. Footprints, noises, the whisper. "Stay here," one of them said, and descended the basement stairs with the other officer. We waited at the top, listening. Their radio static echoed faintly. The storm rumbled. Everything else was still. After what felt like forever, one officer came back up. "Basement's clear," he said. "But there's something you should see." I followed them down. The footprints were still there, muddy and sharp, but they stopped right beneath the window well. The officer shined his flashlight on the metal frame. The screen had been pushed inward from outside, meaning someone climbed in, or tried to climb out. "We'll sweep the yard," the second officer said. "Stay inside." We waited in the living room again, listening to the police move around the house. Eventually they returned, wet and frustrated. "No sign of anyone," one said. "Storm likely wiped out tracks beyond the house." When they left, the quiet felt heavier, not safer. We dragged our blankets into the living room and stayed huddled together. None of us slept. The basement stayed locked, but the house kept creaking as if settling into the memory of whatever had been down there. By 3 in the morning, everyone else was half asleep, but I stayed awake, listening. The storm eased into a drizzle, and the power finally blinked back on, humming through the house like a sigh of relief. But relief wouldn't come for me. Around 4, something tugged at me, an instinct, a chill, something rooted deep in childhood fear. I sat up and looked toward the staircase. A shadow leaned over the railing. Not a person, not a clear shape, just a darker patch of dark, like someone standing there without wanting to be seen fully. I blinked hard. "Still there," I whispered. "Who's there?" Nothing moved. Nothing responded. But the feeling, the unmistakable sense of being watched, dug into me. After several long seconds, the shadow slipped backward, dissolving into the dim hallway. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I didn't wake the others. I didn't move. I just sat there until sunrise burned away enough of the darkness for me to breathe again. We left early the next morning, none of us talking much. I never went back to the basement alone again. Some nights, when I visit the house, I still feel something watching from the stairwell, waiting, patient, curious, like whoever broke in never really left, like maybe they're still looking for a way upstairs. Growing up, my parents were never the type to leave me home alone for long, but when they finally trusted me enough to handle a long weekend by myself, I knew exactly what I wanted to do: host the biggest sleepover our neighborhood had ever seen. I had cousins visiting from out of state, friends from school who lived just a few blocks away, and kids from up and down the street who were always ready for chaos. The moment my parents' car pulled out of the driveway, the house transformed into a buzzing hive. We dragged blankets, beanbags, and old couch cushions into the living room until it looked like a fortress made by children with far too much imagination and zero architectural skill. Video games blared from the TV. Chips were scattered across every table, and the microwave worked overtime heating pizza rolls and buttery popcorn. My cousins tried to outshout each other while my friends debated which horror movie was scary enough but not trauma-inducing. It was the kind of loud, messy, reckless fun that only happens when you mix unsupervised teens in a house that suddenly feels like a kingdom. Around midnight, someone suggested we tell ghost stories. Before I could veto that idea because my house already creaked too much, a loud crash echoed from the backyard. Everyone froze. Then, because we were teenagers and idiots, we laughed. "Probably a raccoon," my cousin Ryan said, "or your grill finally gave up." I shrugged it off, at least until the lights flickered once, then again, and then the entire house went black. In that instant, something shifted the energy, the mood, the air itself. Shadows stretched across the room like they had been waiting all night for this moment, and suddenly, the sleepover didn't feel fun anymore. We scrambled for our phones, screens lighting up our faces like tiny, nervous lanterns. A few kids screamed, others tried to make jokes but their voices wavered. "Relax," I said, trying to sound confident. "Probably the breaker." But inside, my stomach twisted. The house hummed with silence too complete, like the world was holding its breath. Then came the thumping, slow, heavy, from the basement. My cousin Jenna grabbed my arm. "Tell me that's the furnace. It's something," I said. But we both knew the furnace never walked. Another thump closer. We huddled in a circle. Phone flashlights pointed toward the hallway like we expected something to appear. When nothing did, I took charge, because someone had to. "Okay, we checked the breaker. Just me and maybe 2 people. Everyone else stays here with the doors closed." Nobody wanted to volunteer, but eventually Ryan and my friend Tyler agreed. Candles flickered in the living room as we headed toward the basement door. When I opened it, cold air rushed up, and something in that darkness felt wrong. Not like an empty basement, but like a place with someone already standing inside it. We descended slowly, beams sweeping across shelves and boxes. Everything looked normal until we reached the bottom and saw footprints. Wet footprints. Big ones. "I didn't go outside," Tyler whispered. "Neither did I," Ryan muttered. Before I could answer, something creaked behind us upstairs. We spun around, hearts hammering. Someone was no longer in the basement. Someone was now inside the house. We raced back upstairs so fast the candles wavered from the rush of air. "Someone's in the house," I yelled, slamming the basement door and locking it. Everyone started talking at once, questions, panic, suggestions, accusations. But then, cutting through the noise, came a gentle tapping on one of the hallway doors, just 3 knocks too slow, too deliberate. The room fell into dead silence. My heart pounded so loud I felt it in my teeth. "Stay together," I whispered, as though speaking quietly could keep us safe. We backed away from the hallway, forming a shaky cluster in the living room. The tapping stopped. But then we heard something worse whispering, soft, breathy, traveling through the air vents above us. We all stared at the vent. I swear I saw a faint shadow shifting behind the slats. "Is someone messing with us?" Jenna whispered. "No one here is that tall," I said before thinking. The realization hit all of us at the same time. Whoever entered the house wasn't one of us. We sprinted into different rooms, bathroom, closets, pantry, whatever had a lock. "Call the cops!" someone yelled. I was already dialing. My voice shook so much the dispatcher kept asking me to repeat myself. As I talked, another sound echoed, footsteps in the hallway. Slow, dragging, like the intruder wanted us to hear. I held the phone tight. "They're inside," I whispered. "Officers are on their way." the dispatcher said. "Stay hidden. Do not engage." A door slammed somewhere down the hall. Then another. The figure was checking every room and getting closer. We didn't have real weapons, not that I would have known how to use one if we did, but in a panic, you improvise. My cousins tied belts together to jam a door. Tyler stacked chairs behind another. Someone grabbed laundry baskets and tipped them over like they might somehow catch a grown intruder. Then came the whisper again, this time right outside the pantry where 4 kids hid. "I can hear you," it breathed. They screamed and piled deeper inside. I hid in my parents' bedroom with 4 others, pressing myself against the wall as the footsteps moved down the hall. Every thump made my bones vibrate. One kid started crying softly. Another kept repeating, "He shouldn't have gotten in. He shouldn't have gotten in," like a broken record. A loud crash came from the downstairs bathroom, one of our makeshift traps springing. Then a yell, not a human yell, but a raw, angry sound echoed through the house. The intruder had tripped over the stacked chairs. "We made him mad," someone whispered. The footsteps grew faster, more frantic. Then suddenly, they stopped. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. My phone buzzed. The dispatcher. "Officers should be pulling up now." Instantly, police sirens cut through the night. But before they reached the door, something moved toward the back of the house, swift, purposeful. I peeked through the blinds just in time to see a tall silhouette dart across the yard, slipping into the trees like it had done this before. By the time police entered, the house was empty except for terrified kids and scattered traps. The intruder was gone, vanished like he'd never been there at all. The police searched every inch of the property, basement, attic, shed, yard. They found footprints near the back fence, but they stopped abruptly, as if the figure had stepped off the earth and simply disappeared. My parents rushed home before sunrise, still half in pajamas, demanding answers. As soon as they saw our faces, they realized it wasn't a prank or teenage exaggeration. Something real, something dangerous had happened. We spent the next day recounting everything. The crash, the darkness, the footprints, the whispers, the knocks. Every detail sounded unbelievable, even to me. And I lived it. An officer told my parents, "Sometimes intruders choose houses with lots of people. They rely on confusion to hide." That sentence stayed with me. The idea that someone could walk into a home full of kids, move around unnoticed, stay hidden for that long, it changed something in all of us. My parents upgraded every lock, installed cameras, replaced the windows, and added motion lights that lit up the yard like a baseball field. But security measures couldn't fix the way the house felt afterward. For weeks, every creak made me flinch. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. At night, I imagined a shadow standing at the edge of the hallway, just beyond my sight. The sleepover that was supposed to be legendary fun became legendary for all the wrong reasons. But the strangest part? Sometimes, when the house settles late at night, I swear it sounds like someone knocking softly on the walls, someone who never really left. Even in familiar places surrounded by people you trust, danger can slip in quietly. Always stay aware, always stay prepared, and never assume safety just because you feel comfortable. I've lived alone most of my adult life, and for the most part I've always liked it. I like the quiet, the independence, the small rituals that belong to no one but me. Late night reading, mismatched mugs of tea, soft music playing while I fold laundry. After college, while everyone else moved in with partners or crowded into houses with too many roommates, I chose a modest third-floor apartment on the east side of the city. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like mine. That night had started like any other. The rain had begun in the late afternoon, heavy enough to blur the skyline outside my window. By the time midnight rolled around, the downpour had become a steady roar, like someone shaking a giant bag of pebbles above the roof. I was curled up in bed with a thriller novel and a dim lamp, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of lavender detergent. The storm made everything feel sealed off, like the whole world had shrunk to the size of my small apartment. I liked storms, usually. They made me feel tucked away and safe, as if nothing outside could touch me. Around 1 a.m, I closed my book and set it on the nightstand, letting my eyes drift to the sliding balcony door. Rain hammered against the glass, creating little rivers that streaked downward. I watched them absently, half asleep. That's when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, almost polite, but too distinct to be the rain. I sat up a little straighter. Maybe it was just water hitting the metal railing. The wind gusted hard, and I convinced myself that the noise had been nature's doing. But then it came again. Slower, more deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. My stomach tightened, and I swung my legs over the side of the bed. Rain has rhythm. Storms have chaos. But this was intentional. Someone knocking, someone asking to be acknowledged. I told myself not to look. But curiosity and fear make strangers of us, pushing us to do things we know we shouldn't. I walked toward the curtains and pulled them back. The balcony was a dark blur of moving water, but the moment my eyes adjusted, my breath hitched. Someone was standing there, a tall figure in a long raincoat, hood pulled low, droplets cascading off the edges like tiny beads of silver. They were turned toward the glass, face hidden in shadow, body still as stone. For a second, I couldn't move. My body went rigid, my mind unable to make sense of the sight. It wasn't possible. The balcony was on the 3rd floor. There was no ladder, no stairs leading up to it, just a narrow fire escape at the far end of the building. No one could have reached my balcony without climbing. The figure leaned forward slowly, head tilting like they were trying to see inside despite the darkness. My lamp was off, so they shouldn't have been able to tell I was there. But something about the way they pressed closer to the glass made me feel exposed, as though they knew exactly where I was standing. I stumbled backward and let the curtain fall shut. The room felt instantly smaller. The air tightened. My heart drummed so loudly I could barely hear the storm. I crouched and backed away, using my hands to feel my way toward the bedroom door. My voice got stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat, refusing to make sound. By the time I reached the hallway, I was shaking. In the kitchen, I grabbed my phone off the counter. My hands were slick with sweat, my fingers clumsy. I started to dial. Then came the unmistakable sound of the balcony door sliding a few inches. Not a gust of wind, not the building settling. Someone was testing it. I froze with my thumb over the call button. I could hear the faint scrape of metal against metal, as if fingers were trying to coax the lock loose. Then, silence, followed by slow footsteps moving toward the living room window. The storm wasn't the thing I needed protection from anymore. I pressed myself against the kitchen counter, forcing myself to breathe quietly. Even through the thick glass of the living room window, I could hear the shift of footsteps, careful, deliberate, like the intruder was searching for another way in. Rain hammered everything in sight, but somehow their movements cut through the noise, clearer than they should have been. I slid to the floor, crawled behind the island counter, and finally forced my shaking hands to dial 911. I whispered to the dispatcher, barely daring to exhale. "There's someone on my balcony," I said. "I'm on the 3rd floor. They climbed up. They're checking the windows." "Stay on the line," she replied. Her voice was steady, practiced, grounding. "Officers are already in your area because of storm calls. They'll be there soon. Stay low. Do not approach the windows." A soft thud sounded from the far wall. I flinched. The footsteps had moved again, this time toward the fire escape. There was another window near it, narrow and old, one I always meant to get repaired but kept putting off. The thought that the latch might not hold made nausea rise in my throat. I crawled down the hallway to the coat closet and slipped inside, pulling the door almost shut. The dispatcher kept talking to me, asking questions, reassuring me that help was minutes away. Then I heard scraping, metal against metal. Someone was climbing the ladder just outside the fire escape window, boots slipping slightly against the rain-soaked rungs. I held the phone tight against my cheek, afraid the shaking of my body might make noise. "Please hurry," I whispered. I listened to each footstep as if it belonged to a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The rain pounded. The scraping grew louder. Then, nothing. No more footsteps, no more taps, no more scraping, just silence. A silence worse than any sound. I didn't move again until I heard the wail of sirens cutting through the storm. The officers had to buzz up through the main entrance, and I practically ran to let them in. There were 2 of them. A tall man with rain dripping off his jacket and a younger woman who kept her hand near her radio as she scanned the hallway. I was trembling so badly that one of them steadied me by the shoulder. "Where was the intruder last seen?" the woman asked. "The balcony, and then the fire escape." They moved quickly, checking my windows first. When they reached the balcony door, the man crouched down and pointed. "Fresh mud," he said. "You don't usually get this much splatter unless someone's been climbing." I swallowed hard, feeling bile rise. They slid the door open, carefully, guns holstered but hands ready. The wind blew rain inside, cold and sharp. The balcony floor was a mess of puddles, but on the railing were 2 muddy footprints, clear, distinct, too big to be mine. "He came up from the alley," the woman officer murmured. "That's a long climb, even with the drainage pipes." Another officer arrived to search the alley below. Meanwhile, the first 2 checked the fire escape. The window near it was damp along the edges, as though someone had run their fingers along the frame. "Looks like he tried this one too," the man said. "Didn't get the latch open." My breath caught. "What do you think he wanted?" The woman hesitated before answering. "We can't know, but he wasn't sheltering from the storm, I can tell you that." She closed the balcony door firmly and double-checked the lock. "Pack a bag for the night. We're going to recommend you stay somewhere else until we finish the report and notify your building manager." I didn't argue. I didn't even think to. All I knew was that I no longer felt safe in the 4 walls that used to feel like home. I stayed with a friend that night, jumping at every noise, replaying the sound of those deliberate knocks on my balcony door. The storm eventually passed, leaving the city washed and quiet, but I felt like something inside me had been permanently rewired. 2 days later, my landlord called. "The police told me about what happened," he said. "We checked the alley cameras. The footage is too blurry from the rain, but we saw someone climbing up the side of the building. He was using the drain pipe and the ledges." My blood ran cold. "Did you see him leave?" A pause. "No, that's the strange part. We didn't catch him going down the same way. He must have dropped to the dumpster and climbed over the fence." I knew then that I couldn't stay. Every time I looked at the balcony door, I saw that hooded figure leaning toward the glass. Every time I heard rain, I remembered the tapping that didn't belong to the storm. I moved out 2 weeks later, packed everything I owned in boxes and hauled them down 3 flights of stairs, refusing to ever step onto that balcony again. My new apartment is smaller, but it feels safer. Higher up, with better locks, surrounded by people I can hear through the walls. Some might call that noisy. I call it comforting. But even now, whenever thunder rolls or rain streaks across the windows, I find myself checking the glass twice, sometimes 3 times. Because storms used to make me feel protected, now they remind me how silence can be broken by the wrong kind of knock, and how home can change in a single night.